Hi, I'm Chun-Lu.
And I'm Sal, and this is our next make.
Picking up where we left off last week, and referring back to our SOLIDWORKS design, we're starting to build the raised bed garden and chicken run for the coop. The first thing we do is prep the 4x4 posts. They need to be notched to receive 2x4s that will support the weight of the grow beds.
We first make a series of curve cuts across the 4x4s, and then use a hammer to knock out the pieces. This leaves a fairly rough surface on the bottom, and although it would be perfectly fine for a project like this, we took a minute to trim the high spots with a palm router. Of course, you could also use a chisel to do this.
We assembled the wall sections on the floor of the garage just like we did when building the coop. Making sure that the first wall was square allowed us to build the second and third walls right on top of it, and get great results.
With all of the sub-assemblies prepped, we carried them out to the yard. These were even lighter than the coop walls. To locate this first wall, it's important that it's both square to the coop and level. We can get pretty close to square by simply butting it up against the coop, and then we just have to check for level and adjust as needed. To figure out how far down to dig, we need to see how far out of level we are. So I've got a 4-foot level here. We can take a measurement of how far out we are. So we're out by about 1.25 inches over 4 feet. The length of the wall is 9 feet, so we have to do a little math. 9 is 2.25 times more than 4. So we need to multiply that 1.25 inches by 2.25.
With our numbers figured out, we got to work digging the trench for the wall. It took a few tries to get it right, but we got it nice and level, which set us up well to work on the next wall section. We just held the first wall in place by clamping a board to it. This acted as a sort of kickstand while we dug to level the second wall.
The third wall was the easiest to install, as it didn't require any digging. We just had to level it by raising it up on a few bricks. With that done, we could screw all of the walls together.
While we still had our shovels out, we took a minute to remove the high spot where the raised bed will go, and used the dirt to fill a bit of the low spot near the coop.
Then we headed back into the garage to start working on the inner walls of the raised garden beds. Being able to work in the garage didn't just help us escape the sun and heat for a while, but the nice flat floor made it really easy to build a perfectly square assembly.
We carried the U-shaped walls out to the garden and carefully negotiated it through the doorway opening. While we leveled the assembly and installed a set of short braces, our son worked on digging a shallow trench for the fencing all the way around the garden and coop. For the grow beds around me, we're going to use these composite boards for its bottom. And they'll also serve as a nice protective shade cover for the chicken run.
We set up a makeshift stop block system using a series of clamps and scraps of wood, and then batched out the parts. I'd cut them to length, and Chun-Lu would pre-drill holes in each end. Then we could arrange all the parts along the grow beds and screw them in place. We just added one screw at the middle on each end.
In order to keep the chicken coop in place during high winds, we're going to use these earth anchors. And the way they work is these augers will dig down into the soil, and we will bolt this to the frame.
We installed 4 anchors, one at each corner of the coop. Then we pre-drilled holes in the 4x4 posts to receive lag screws. But before attaching them, we first need to install some fencing. To keep the chickens safe from predators, we're going to use this 1/2 inch by 1 inch welded hardware cloth. And we've chosen a PVC coated version so that it stands up even better to the elements.
We rolled out and cut to length a piece of fencing, and then bent it into a 2-foot by 1-foot L. We slipped the long side up under the siding and then back down over the earth anchors through a small opening we cut in the fence.
We're running the hardware cloth 2 feet up the side of the coop, and then another 1 foot coming out horizontally around the entire perimeter. This will prevent any predators from wanting to dig underneath. And we're holding it in place with 2.5 inch screws and oversized washers. We attached washers and screws about every 8 inches, and then drove in the lag screws to attach the earth anchors. You could do this with a good old wrench, but a socket adapter for an impact driver makes this step go much faster.
While the weather did its thing, we moved back into the garage to work on the garden door and the siding for the grow beds. I ripped the T111 to width using a circular saw and straight edge, while Sal cut the door pieces to length.
Building the door was much like building the other wall sections. The only important difference was the addition of a diagonal brace. You want to orient it so it's in compression. So just figure out which side of the door your hinges will be on, and then put the lower end of the diagonal close to the hinges, and the upper end of the diagonal away from the hinges.
With all of the lower fencing in place, we started installing the upper fencing. Here we're using a 1" by 1" grid and holding it in with the same screws and washers. Where the fencing is trapped by the grow bed siding, we just use 1 5/8" screws to hold everything in place.
Just like we did on the coop, we used various PVC moldings to trim out the grow beds. I mitered some corner molding and screwed it in place to create a nice finished look, and Chin-Lu installed other corner pieces to complete the job. We also added the same molding and trim to the inside faces of the grow beds.
Large projects like this tend to have their share of mishaps. For example, when I started cutting the side panels, I had miscalculated, so I cut them way too short. I did eventually get it correct, such as this one.
Instead of wasting material, what we decided to do was use the smaller pieces in this stair-stepped or shingled effect, and I think it came out really nice.
To hold the soil in place, we're lining the grow beds with landscape fabric and stapling it to the frames. We just work our way around the beds, installing 3 overlapping pieces.
While we waited for a delivery of dirt to arrive, we worked on a few small details, like installing additional blocking under the coop to further secure the fencing, and finishing up on the outside corners. When we were installing the lower mesh, we chose not to run it long. And what that does is creates an opening in the mesh at the bottom corner. So we created these small L-shaped panels that we're going to place here. We're actually going to slide them under each side so it's even more secure. If we were to do this again, I think we'd run the fence long on one side and then cut a slit in the overhang to lay part of it flat. When the next piece is placed, it would overlap and create an even stronger corner.
Now we, or should I say our sons, could fill back in the trenches and cover up the fencing. And when the dirt arrived, they filled in the grow beds. They did it a bucket at a time, but it went fairly quickly. We used the extra dirt to fill in the low spots and give Sal's dad a safe and level space to enter the garden.
While Chin-Lu added more trim to the grow beds, I worked on the small chicken coop door. It's really just a box, but it's a specific triangular shape so that it can perform 2 important functions. Its primary job, of course, is to keep out predators when the door is shut. It does this by sealing the coop entrance with an oversized panel. At the same time, it seals the table openings so nothing can enter the run from above. A simple lock holds everything in place. When the door is open, the chickens are free to roam their run, while the door still keeps predators from entering from above.
As we draw near to the finish line, it's time to do some cleanup and finish up on the last few details. While our son tirelessly clipped out sheets of fencing, Sal built frames to assemble panels. These are just simple 2x2 pressure-treated frames with 1x1 fencing stapled to them. On the inside of the garden, we wanted to put removable wire panels below the raised beds to keep the hens in the run away from the garden and still make it easy to get to the run when necessary. The ladder that the chickens will use to get into and out of the coop was built out of a 2x4 and scraps of 2x2. We attached it just underneath their special door, and then we secured some more composite boards in place to create a table surface upon which to rest an egg or vegetable harvesting basket.
To wrap up the project, we installed the garden door by raising it up on 1/2" spacers, driving in the hinge screws, and mounting the lock and handle hardware.
We knew coming into this project it was going to be challenging, but it was worth every moment of it. We always talk about how important it is to make something special for the people that matter to you. But this particular one has been the most rewarding yet.
I completely agree. It was great to have the entire family lend a hand to bring this to life, and I love the fact that we now have a permanent reminder in my parents' backyard about how we feel about them. I also love that my father's dream of having chickens is finally a reality, and having the garden right there to work in as well. It's really great.
So if you've ever considered making a garden or a chicken coop, we hope this episode inspired you.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on our next make.